And I said, I got to write this down. Think about it all. It says, sometimes you got to do something to discover you don't want to do it.
That's exactly true. Yeah.
I learned that way.
I have that mindset.
Yeah,
Oh, there you go. Chelsea, I was like, it's another. Look at Chelsea out here. Oh, no. Can you hear me?
You talking to me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hey!
Hi, sis.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How are you doing?
Great. Can you see the other speakers here?
I can.
Okay. And can you hear them too?
Yes.
Hello?
I can hear.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, we're going to get started. Are we live yet, Chelsea?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Natasha Ria Elsari, and I am here at the UMKC Women's Center for our first ever Faith and Feminism. Behind the camera, we have Chelsea Duckworth, our senior program coordinator, and we have our work study students here with us and some UMKC students, as well as you, our audience that's joining us online. Thank you so much. So very excited to have this conversation around this time of year, which is considered, there are 26 sacred events in the month of December, if I'm not mistaken, across all different religions. And so we thought that it would be appropriate to kind of talk about faith and feminism and how women who consider themselves feminists grapple with their faith, grapple with faith that is often deeply entrenched in patriarchy, and how they navigate that. And so I'm so excited to have some guests here that are coming from different faith backgrounds. We wanted more backgrounds represented, but people weren't always able to adhere to this time. So hopefully when we have this next year, we'll have another group of people. So Ariane, if you want to, oh, she popped off. If you can hear me, maybe she's not. I know she's at work, y'all, too. But I want to introduce her first because if you are interested, she has written an amazing book called Women of the Bible and You. I immediately purchased this book because Reverend Ariane Yvette is a friend of mine. And also, I'm not a Christian, but I grew up in Christianity and left at the age of 14. And so it was such a wonderful, reflective, honest read about the beauty and power of women in the Bible, written from a womanist perspective, which is a Black feminist perspective. And so I just said, I have to have Rev Ariane on here to talk about this. That's just one of her books. She has another book out too. And so, and a lot of exciting things happening. We have Jen Weavers here, who is like a secret. She's all things religion, knowledge, master's in divinity. And she didn't tell me that for a very long time. I think I had to discover it from someone else. And, but very knowledgeable in how she activates her feminism within faith areas that looks and operates differently. And I'll let them talk a little bit more, but I just want to kind of, yeah. So Jen and I also both work at and attend the Center for Spiritual Living, Kansas City. In the middle, we have the amazing, profound, beautiful Queen Mother Mary Moore, who is joining us from the background of Christianity and is a very big troublemaker within Christianity, which is amazing considering that she is about to enter her 8th decade. So she's on the way to her 8th decade, and she has been here stirring up all kinds of good trouble questions and challenging the way in which that she was raised under the Christian faith, and has been very public about grappling with what that means as her activism increases and as her own awareness around feminism increases. And so I wanted to have Mother Mary here as well. And then to my far right, my dear friend Jessica Royer, who is actually in school studying to be Reverend Jessica. I chuckled too when I just thought about saying that.
Oh my God.
But definitely a person who has always worked within her activism. And I would say in a really kind of, what do I want to say it?
Unaware that I was doing it.
Yeah, unaware, but also kind of secret. What is it? What do I want to say? Like circumventing, but definitely not boisterous at all, right? And so I wanted to have your representation here as well, because I think sometimes when we think or hear the word feminist, we have a single idea of what that means and what that looks like, right? Or when we think about faith, we have a single idea for what that looks like or what that means. And really, there are many. And so, one, I would love for you all to introduce yourselves in a single sentence. Don't forget to grab the microphone when you do. I mean, two
Single
sentences.
sentence.
Or maybe two.
Oh, we go. So Jen Weavers, and just quickly, I do have a master's in divinity from Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and I have a really interesting path in and out of different religious traditions and jobs. And I have a deep love for the diversity and the ways in which people express their relationship to the sacred. That is really my passion.
That was good for one sentence.
Put those limitations on me.
Wow. I met Mother Mary Moses, and the process of becoming that woman, the spirit of Miss Harriet all over me, making good trouble. And my experience around, oh my God, religion, culture, racism, where I am now, and I am connected to a source, that one spiritual source we call God, and unbranded myself to any particular religion, and I'm having a much better experience connected to that source that I am guided by.
I'm Jessica. My first professional endeavor was I was a behavior analyst, certified behavior analyst, working with kiddos and their families with autism. So often have schools and homes. Me and religion. I don't know that there's a faith tradition that I'm not like interested in learning about. And the more I learn about them, it's a very long sentence, the more I understand how similar they all seem to be. I have struggled, I'm getting better at understanding it, struggled with the business side of faith traditions, or the religion part of it, because the mystical beauty of them all seems to kind of dance together. And so, and I would say probably I've been a seeker. I didn't think of myself that way, but like really interested in just like reading and listening to different things, and landed where I am right now for the time being.
Awesome. Ariane, Reverend R.
Yes, I put Rev Ari. That's what my students call me. I am a chaplain at the University of Indianapolis, though I'm born and bred in Kansas City, Missouri. I would say I'm ordained in the AME Zion Church, which is a historically Black Methodist tradition. I teach women to embrace faith, femininity, and fierceness so that they can fashion a life they love and live their dreams. In my work at the university, I actually have a huge focus on interfaith work. So I work with certainly students of Christian tradition, but also students with Muslim background. We interact and work with Buddhist students. I mean, just you can run the gamut. And we try to really create opportunities for interfaith cooperation on our campus, as well as to promote religious literacy, which we know is kind of important in this day and age. It's always been important, right? But we think it's key for students to have exposure to that in college, for sure, if they haven't had it before so they're prepared when they leave here to interact across religious difference.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have you here from representing another institution. Do we have a chaplain here?
You would have to.
I don't know. I really don't know. Do you all know if we have a chaplain?
A lot of time, public schools don't have chaplains.
Okay.
That's often, not always, but that's often at private institutions.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I was just curious about that. I was thinking that. I know we do have an interfaith council that's student led, and we did cross promote here, but I see Chelsea's back there doing her research to see if we have a chaplain. So because we are at an institution of higher learning, one of the things that I always like to ask all of our guests is a little bit about your educational background. But I want to give this with a caveat, and that is that there's the question is loaded for a couple of reasons. One, because what you're studying is a part of your journey, but I think we give students so much pressure, like you gotta know, when in reality, getting the education is important, and your life is going to journey where it journeys. But I think it's interesting to see different people's educational backgrounds. And so I asked that question for that reason, and also in a way that is not judging regardless of what that education is, but just to kind of give a little bit of information about that. So who would like to tackle that question first about their educational background?
So I grew up in Wyandotte County, Kansas, went through 12 years of Catholic school. And I was like, I want to get as far away from Catholic school as I possibly can when I went to do my bachelor's. So I ended up at a small college in Ohio called Oberlin, which has a really strong activist tradition, and fell in love with studying world religions. Who knew? The thing I was trying to escape, I ended up falling in love with. And the reason I loved it was because I loved the diversity of voices. I loved how I was forced to think differently, how some of my assumptions I had as a kid in a certain religious tradition just got blown open in all kinds of amazing ways. So I like the blowing open. Some people don't, but I did. And so I thought I was going to go do my PhD eventually and be a professor of religion in some campus somewhere. And so then I ended up going to school in New York City to do my Master of Arts. And then I was going to do the PhD. And again, I was being educated in a context of difference. It was people from all religious traditions, really. All Christian denominations, and then a few others. And then I realized it was about something more than just the academic study of religion. And my last name is Weavers. And I would go to chapel every day because initially I was like, oh, I'm not doing that. I'm just here for academic reasons. And then I started going to chapel every day, and I would cry every day in chapel because people were so amazing with what they were telling us and sharing. And so everyone started to call me Weepers. That became my nickname. And I will, name drop here, but one of my tutors was Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is now a senator from Georgia. And whenever he was preaching, I was always in the front seat because it was going to be amazing. And so Union, again, also opened me up. But it opened me up that I wasn't going to go down this purely academic path. And I was more interested in the spirituality. And coming from the Roman Catholic tradition, I went somewhere where there would be no rules against me as a woman. So being Catholic, you couldn't preach, you couldn't become a priest, all these different things. So I went to a school that supported me and allowed me to do all of that. So that was how my educational background really informed and shaped me.
Feedback.
You don't have to. Ravari, do you want to go?
I can find the mute button. So education, in terms of growing up, I was educated in the public schools of Kansas City, Missouri. And I don't know if I was trying to escape anything exactly. I wanted to experience something different. I know that was sort of my outlooks. I applied everywhere. Okay, I applied to every school on the face of the earth, but I did land at Howard University in Washington D.C. Um, and what can I say about that education? Definitely life changing. I often say that I have never been in a more diverse place than the day I first set foot on Howard's campus. I actually um, had a teacher in high school question my decision to attend a historically Black college. Don't you want to be in a more diverse place? Don't you want to be in a place that's more like the real world? But it was beautiful for me to be there because I got to see the diversity of Black folks. It wasn't just folks from the Midwest or folks who had relatives that were from the South. There are folks from the West Coast and East Coast, and they talk different and they dress different, they look different. We have folks from West Africa and some from South Africa, some from the UK, some from the Caribbean. And just to be in a place that, first of all, never questioned my abilities, my intellect, my anything, and where really it was very much a iron sharpens iron kind of space. And so I will say it did though build upon what I felt like was a really good education I got in Kansas City because I actually, and this is very important for me as I think about what it is to be a, a feminist, to embrace womanism. I actually almost all my elementary school teachers except for one were Black women, so it actually mattered a lot that I was nurtured at a very young age by women who believed in me, looked like me, shared culture with me, and really told me from the very beginning all that I could do and could be. And so Howard then, of course, and I had several more teachers after that, of course, that did the same. Some Black, some not, some women, some not, But all those things I just see as sort of building me to be this sort of very confident woman who like believes I can do a lot of awesome things. I mean, sometimes, I struggle with, with some of the things I want to try to do. But Howard was a place that I was surrounded by people who really believed the same thing about themselves. And also there was this very clear like focus and intentionality around we're doing all this, we're getting educated, but how does that then benefit our community? Like that was always the question in the classroom. So it wasn't just me for mine and what I can get, but that question always comes back to. So it really centered me in this place of which tied in very much for me in my Christian upbringing, right? That it isn't just about you, but this tie to community and what God had me to do that gives back to others beyond myself. I could probably say more. Briefly, I went to Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary for my Master of Divinity, um, which again, really great United Methodist institution. But it was actually my first time in graduate school where I was not in the majority, right? Um, as a a person of color, right? So that was actually really because I went to inner city schools, went to Paseo Academy, so um, there were, and then Howard. So it was my first time. So that was an interesting experience to be in a place where you were having to push for sometimes recognition or to push what inclusion looked like and those kinds of things. And also very interesting that that happened in a place that's shaping preachers and ministers and just like all those dynamics. Like, do we really have to have this conversation with y'all? Okay, we do. Um, and so it was very interesting, but it was also good to sort of activate that activism, right, that I had developed and learned at Howard too. So hope that wasn't too long.
It wasn't. So, Reverend Ari, I remember us talking a lot about that, your graduate school experience and what that was like for you, and just kind of that shock of these people are going to be leading people to some kind of higher self, like battling with all of those intersectionalities of class and race and gender. So I'm glad that you brought that up about your experience there. And then you said something that is actually really powerful. I saw a little clip when someone asked Viola Davis what was the key to a great marriage, And she was like, they were like, what's your best romantic advice? And she was like, to love yourself. Because when you love yourself, it actually makes you a better partner for someone else. And so what you talked about teaching and the fierceness and the faith and all of that. And that was, I think, where you and I connected, was just our both, like, my husband always says, I'm like, yes, I did that. Yes, I did that. Because it's like, if you don't, then everybody will just kind of suck it up and be like, oh yeah, like, or just belittle that you did it, because that's the expectation. And then reading Spiritual Liberation yesterday with by Michael Beckwith, one of the things that he said in the introduction was, religion is the intellectual part of faith, but the spiritual journey is the heart part. So when you were talking about going to school, but then finally going into the space to receive it in that heart journey. And those are two very different journeys. So you can have all of the intellectual part and fully know and understand. It just reminds me of what my grandmothers always say, oh, baby, just keep living. You know what I mean? Like, keep living. And that is like a part of that heart journey, is like how in the spiritual aspect of it. So I don't know. I just was thinking about both those things that you all shared, a little bit about the educational part. So was it, yeah, Jess?
So I grew up in a tiny town in southern Kansas, 8,000 people or so, 4 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school. And in 5th grade, apparently I topped out on the curriculum that was offered in 5th grade. And there was a school in the next bigger city, which is Wichita, that I guess it's like Pembroke or Barstow, those kind of schools, that my family was able to figure out how to get me there. So it was a very interesting carpool experience that I had with one of my dad's clients, who was a mechanic in Wichita, and I would go to McDonald's for the bus to pick me up. It was all very exciting. So I did that, and then as part of that senior year experience, you apply for all these schools, and it's pretty cool. And I got accepted, and I'm going through my letters with my dad, and he sits me down, and we have the conversation that KU, University of Kansas, was good enough for my grandpa and my auntie and my dad, and they'd all go. And that was it. Going to KU. It wasn't a conversation of not going to school. Like that wasn't anywhere in my brain. And KU was where I was going to go. And so yeah. And like I joked about a couple questions ago, bounced around in different majors that I thought would be interesting, because I don't know that it was an option to not have a major. And the first one I picked was philosophy, because I like to read books and talk about them. And the first philosophy class was ridiculous, and so I dropped philosophy and bounced around from social welfare and all the social work, and I done even journalism school, and did a brief stint in the education school. Flunked math for school teachers, and so that was not the place for me to be. And my dad's 2 sisters were both we called it MRS. They got married. They went to college, got a degree in education, taught until they got married. They never did an out of the house job again.
Do you all know what an MRS is?
Right.
No.
Okay.
Right. It is an unfair. It's really an unfair label. Because it implies that inside of the house work is less than out of the house work.
And so I didn't learn about the MRS until, of course, I went to the Deep South. And so basically it's the women who, how it was presented to me, was the women who go to school to find the affluent husband. So you get the degree only to say that you are educated to then marry the doctor or the lawyer. And they call it an MRS degree. So for Mrs. So you go for your Mrs. degree. So
So my mantra in my head was, I will work with children, maybe, but I won't be a teacher, right? Like that was my thing. So a little bit like your quote, like I learned a lot about what I wanted to do by what I didn't want to do, but I had to have all of those experiences bouncing around. So in my 5th year, my dad says, maybe this is the major to graduate. And I was in the human development, family life, I don't know, doing something there. I'm like, I guess I'll pick this, right? And so I graduated in human development and family HDFL. And I don't know what I would have done with that degree as a bachelor, but a couple of professors were watching me work. And I was working with kids with autism at the time for credit, like had to petition to take 23 hours because in order to get credit to work with these kids with autism, which is a whole other story. This professor out of UCLA was doing the stuff that we now do with kids with autism. That study came out of UCLA, and they partnered with professors at KU, and I just bumped into it. And so that is how I ended up in my first career, is that I just said yes. Somebody, Michelle, came and said, you should go to graduate school. I'm like, I don't know what that is. You could get a master's. I'm like, I didn't even know the word. I didn't know what that meant. And so my friend Jen's like, well, I think I'm going to go to graduate school. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go if you're going to graduate school. I don't know what that is, but okay. And I signed up for graduate school.
even as a third generation college student,
so I've now realized that I have ADHD and there's a lot of things I don't pay attention to, and apparently I didn't, because they got advanced degrees. My dad went to law school.
right?
But women did advanced degrees. My mother didn't go to college. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
I knew that there were grad students like running the practicums, the preschool practicums that I was working at, but I didn't know what it meant. I didn't pay attention to it. Oh, that makes sense. I don't know if it does, but I really was pretty clueless about it. And so said yes to graduate school. My first professor, my advisor was Barbara Etzel. Sitting in her office smoking one of the first out lesbian women I had ever met. Her ex-partner was also a professor in our department. And that was probably my first bumping into what a strong woman, or an out strong woman. My grandmothers are differently strong, but an out strong woman. And I had to pass in order to go to graduate school. Yeah. So I went to graduate school and then said yes to a career in autism because I was good at it. So I just kind of kept saying yes. But the experience of all of the different, I loved the liberal arts education. I thrive on that. The diversity of classes, I want to pick that class to take, and oh no, I have to do these in the major because I'm never going to graduate. But that I thrive on that. My daughter, that is not her deal. Her dad, not his deal, right? Like not everybody thrives on that. But I promised to be in school.
You are in school.
I am. Then I got 2 papers due at the end of this week. I'm not ready to write papers. Anyway, I'll stop now.
Well, education. Listening to each one.
Put that a little closer to Mary.
Listening to each one of you share your experience in getting an education. I can only refer to my own experience. I'm 11th of 13 children. I grew up, was born on a plantation in the deep, segregated, racist, the 10th power South. Terror and all of the things that people might read about. I experienced it, all of it. And my journey in finding my way forward. On that plantation around religion, I grew up in the Sanctified Church, in the Church of God in Christ, and see so much the influence of that music and that culture, weaved into all of our music. That's where it came from, out of the culture of the Black culture, of jazz and blues and R&B and every other kind of music that we would spiritually listen to came out of the Black church. And down on the plantations in Mississippi. Education, neither of my parents knew how to write. They only knew how to make an X. They didn't know. I had to teach my mother how to write for me. I was the first of the 11 of the siblings. I was the first one to graduate from high school. And I was, that's my mother's heart. That was a big deal for my mother, for me to graduate from high school. The other siblings left, running away, trying to get away from that terror that we were going through. And I was offered a scholarship because I had a gift by Mrs. Gladys Sweeting, who came from Detroit, and she went to my mother, out on that house, out there on that plantation. And I was offered a full scholarship to Southern University in music and voice. And Mama said I couldn't do it. But that culture in the deep south, you did what your mama said. So I have experienced extremes in religion, state of woman's place, crap, I call it, respectfully, because I grew up in that culture. The woman being silent and the voices of women being silenced. And I can only say that for the 79 years that I've been here. By the way, because there was the man who I married was known in that community. He was one of the lords, and because they came to the mother and said, "I want to court your daughter." And of course, with my mother seeing him as one of those more lonesome land, and so I was sent into a marriage, into an arranged relationship with someone, with the father of my 5 children. And my story, what my mother didn't know was that I was also married into someone, into a cult. So I've experienced the extreme in religion. And where I sit now in my life, lots of unlearning. I've done a lot of searching and traveling the world. I jumped, by the way, after nearly 30 years out of that marriage that was in the cult. And I vowed to myself, because I did have a strong, and still do have a strong belief in God, in the spiritual creator of all life. And what I will say is that I haven't had a formal education. I was a mother. I immediately got pregnant, started having babies and children, and trying to be the mother and the wife. I baked the best pies, and I waxed the floors. I wore the apron. I did all the things of the wife, of the housewife. And I don't resent that. What I will say now is that I had the courage to jump. I jumped out. I've jumped, made many leaps of faith, whatever you want to call it, where I just said I had to do something. And with the many choices that I've made to jump, outside of what I learned and all of the traditions in my family and in my culture, many books. I read so many books, and that has been how I've learned from many writers, teachers, spiritual authors, some of the names of people that you've mentioned here. So I've read lots of books, and I've also, my big question to any Christian faith around Christianity, because I see inside of the story. I look at the story. I'm a storyteller. I see people's story, and I've read the Bible from front to back. And my question for anyone: do you read the Bible, or do you study the Bible? Because when I started looking at the stories and the many scenarios that that I study, and I look at the cliches, some of them that has come out of reading, the Bible, and one of them is called Raising Cain, which became a cliche. And from my perspective, I looked at it and I said, "Oh my God, I think we managed to raise millions of them." Because when I think about Adam, the story of Adam and Eve, and how what happened in the Garden of Eden. Am I still here? Mm-hmm. But in the Garden of Eden, when I look at that story, and I said to myself, she made that choice, and they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And I asked myself, did they really have a wonderful, rainbow-filled, hunky-dory relationship after that? I don't think so. I think he never let her forget it. When I say raising Cain, because in my own healing and restoration of my family and my children, and in my own life, the learning and the unlearning, I'm still unlearning a lot. And I think about this brother who wound up killing his own brother. And they, brother killing brother out there. How did they just wake up one day and decide I want to kill my brother? I don't think so. From my perspective, I said this child, he probably, and looking at my own raising children, you can recognize this one has special needs. When you have 2 or 3 children, you said this is what I don't have to worry about, but this one over here I need to pay a special attention to. And that's what I really believe that happened. This child had some behavioral issues up inside the house. And mom and dad was so busy fighting and whatever was going, so much disorder up in the house that this child, that they had not recognized that this child had a problem, that needed some special attention in his behavior or what have you. And I believe that's what happened. And I've written an essay around that how Cain and Abel wound up killing his brother because mom and dad were, in their relationship, were not paying a special attention to the children. And that's one of the things I think about. And also, I'm very proud and I'm very thankful at this moment in time that I've lived this long. I arrived in Kansas City in 1968, 3 weeks before the assassination of Dr. King. So I've experienced the extreme around so much culturally, around racism. And it's been my prayer and knowing the importance of having the hard conversation. I grew up in a culture that said, don't talk about it. Let sleeping dogs lie. Let sleeping dogs lie. And I say the dog is asleep. He's not dead. And so I've been waking up to sleeping dogs and having hard conversations. It's uncomfortable sometimes. Most times it is. It is for me, and I'm not real comfortable right now in this place, at this present moment. But I'm learning so much and about the importance of education. I've always been very inquisitive about what the experience was inside of the seminaries. Everybody goes to seminary, and you go to have that experience to be the pastor of the church, to be the leader. And but I feel a sense of peace, a sense of thanksgiving, seeing now where we are in the 21st century, women unsilencing their voice. I became very engaged with the spoken word community, children, over a decade ago, and have gone to attended many of their gatherings where they're really speaking their truth. It's really their healing. And I understand where it's coming from. I understand why. And this is their way of healing. And most of them, I would say the majority of them, are believers. They're really deeply spiritual people. I've attended a couple of their ordinations, so they are people of faith, but doing what they have just said, what they have rejected has been what was tradition. What was tradition. So the back of what tradition was, this is the way to do it. I've seen the back of that monster, of that way of thinking change. And,
so Mother Mary, you kind of mentioned just, and I want to just, if you could do briefly. Mother Mary doesn't do briefly, and I tell her, you got to do briefly. What makes you uncomfortable in this setting? Because one, we want to make you comfortable, but also, can you share a little bit if you're comfortable enough to share?
I guess it's probably my own subconscious, because my journey around, as I've traveled the world, I've gone to Africa. I've lived in Africa for several months, nearly a year with the African people, coached in West Africa. And I've also gone to live in Europe and in France and in Germany. And what was the question?
So what makes you uncomfortable?
I guess there's some more healing that I need to do. It's my own self worth. I've always found myself around my social circle. There have been people who've gone to universities and got college degrees and that kind of thing. And I never had had that experience. And so I think it's what is it for? What is the purpose of it all for me? Is to use my life and what I've written to uplift my people, especially Black people, in our own healing and restoration. And I feel that now that your generation of children of women and engaging in the conversation on every level.
Well, Mother Mary, just rest assured there are people that have degrees that have never picked up a book. Really? Since they finished their degree. They did just enough to graduate. And so I just want to remind you that you are a lifelong learner. And I talk to my students about all the ways that we can shift class. Mm-hmm. And one of those ways is an exceptional talent. And so what she's not sharing with you all is that she's an she was an international jazz singer and has traveled all over the world singing jazz and performing jazz. And so the reason that I think that your story is important is that you still, hi, how are you? You still, you got the education, and it also talks about like opportunity. So if you just juxtapose, let's like talk about it, the difference between Jessica not knowing and you not knowing, right? And how different those worlds are, not only in faith, but in this American culture, right? The difference between saying, hey, it doesn't matter where you're going to go, where you want to go, you're going to go to this college. Whereas you were told it doesn't matter what you want to do, you're not going to go to college, you're going to marry this man. You all were both told what you were going to do, and you all both did it. It just, and didn't question it. And so, because of the way structure and class and race and all those things are in this country, y'all had very different experiences, but the experience itself was the same. Whereas I imagine Jen and I were like, this is where we're going, we don't care, bye, you know, that kind of thing. But everybody did something a little different. Like I was very nurtured as a child, and my intelligence, like you were saying, you know, was celebrated by my family. And I have a theory like that Black women, it doesn't matter what class you're a part of, you are celebrated if you are a smart Black girl. It doesn't matter if you're poor, it doesn't matter if you're rich, it doesn't matter. Being smart is celebrated for the purpose of school and getting, you know, and moving forward and making a better life for yourself, which will ultimately make this better life for whatever future family or your current family or younger siblings or whatever, right? Be an example. And so I just want to say that to you because I remember my mom saying that to me one time. She was like, you have me around all these people with an education. I'm like, half of them are idiots. Like, what? You are the smartest woman I know. So let us not like judge a person's worth. I mean, it is an accomplishment to finish school. I'm very proud of my accomplishments, but it's not tied to the worth of a person. And that is the part that we have to really remind people of as we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, that it means across class as well. Yeah. So.
And all education is not formal.
Right. Lived experience is
Absolutely
very real. Yes.
And I will say the one thing that I have said, and I say it profoundly, just from many experiences I've had with many people from so many different cultures and backgrounds. And I say that education has nothing to do with intelligence.
Yes.
And that's what I say.
Mary, when you were sharing, and then Natasha, when you were just speaking, I just had this thought that I just wanted to share. That when we drove on campus, and we had kind of a chuckle about how ridiculous it is to try to find your way around a campus. And I kind of mumbled, I don't know if you guys heard me, I said, you know, we want guests, but we really don't want guests, right? Like you can come here, but we don't really want you here. And it made me think about lots of places, right? Like maybe in some religious training and higher education and those places where the exclusivity and not inclusivity and the stories that we make to make that divide of you don't belong here because it's this and we want you to feel uncomfortable because this is hallowed ground of la 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 la. That's right. that I feel like if we where our feet are and you where your feet are can make that bridge and make it not uncomfortable for the folks that don't, you know, do this sort of book training, if you will, or this experience of education is no less than somebody who goes to trade school and does welding, for Pete's sake. That's hard, right? Like, or you know, the school of life of learning on the road with all of your mentors that you've bumped into over the years. Like that's hard work, to learn that way, right? It kind of makes, sitting in the college seat a little bit easier because it's brought to me. I didn't have to create it. You created yours, right? But the stories that we're unraveling and relearning they're real. And I can say to myself, well, my head says that it isn't that way, but I still have to relearn the story and I still have to reframe it. And that's the piece that I think we can help each other with. And that's maybe where spirituality pops into the human experience of whatever our day-to-day bit is.
I agree with that. That's powerful. So my question to you all is, can you recall the first experience that you had within religion where you were like, whoa, this is not the same for women as it is for men, or girls as it is for boys? Do you remember your first whoa?
I can share one. I don't know if it was my first. It was definitely impactful. I Because again, for me, I really did grow up in some very nurturing environments. If that was home, if that was school, family. And then Howard, when I was in seminary, they had a gathering of Black Methodist students because they had a Christian Methodist Episcopal Church bishop, which that's a Black Methodist tradition. He was in town, and they had gathered all these ministers from there are 3 historically Black Methodist denominations. So they had gathered ministers and folks from those groups to come. The school was working on building relationships with those institutions and yada yada, scholarships for students, etc. And so we had a meal, and I was sitting with a couple of ministers. There was a minister on my left, another on the right. I didn't know them, and with some other students, and they were male, and everybody sitting there at my particular table may have been male. Everyone at the event was not, but we were talking, and there was this one minister who, and I won't say his denomination, but he was kind of driving the conversation that we were having, except he intentionally asked questions to the male students that were sitting there the whole time and never said one word to me, like asked very specific questions of them, and they responded and whatever. This was all our first year. So we're kind of getting the lay of the land. And I'm sitting here like, I mean, at one level, I'm eating my food, do whatever. But then I'm like, he really is not talking to me. And then our preaching professor came into the event a little late. Black woman from Trinidad, phenomenal, taught me everything I know about preaching. And she comes in the room late. He notices her and he says, is that you all's preaching professor? And some of the guys like, yeah, that's her. That's her. And he's like, is she any good? Okay. I was like, strike 2. And so I'm sitting here and like, is he for real? First off, like she can run circles around you. Be very clear. Another thing was that he was talking to first year students. So what do they know, right? First off, about even like sizing up one of their own professors, the idea that this clergy person is inviting first year seminary students to question the quality of and the scholarship of a Black woman who has, by the way, a DMin, a business degree, and a PhD. But all right. So that was number 2. And then toward the end of the meal, I think it finally dawned on him that, oh, there's someone else sitting here. And at the time, I was transitioning my hair from relaxed to natural. So it was very free. Okay. And he says, what's that hairstyle you call that there? Wow. So my only contribution to this whole interaction today was my hair. Wow. And I was like, this was disgusting. Now, this was not the experience I had at my seminary by far. Like, it was nothing like that. This was a guest visiting the seminary. But here he is representing his church. And I am a little budding baby minister starting out. And this was my experience with someone who had been doing the work of ministry for probably 30 or 40 years. Impactful, painful.
Yeah. Wow. So did you report it? Talk about it?
So I'm a slow processor. In the moment, it's often very difficult for me to respond. I'm a little better at that now, but I think I just sat with it for a bit. I did kind of share it with like my classmates later. And I don't think they really noticed it, but it was helpful for them to hear that, as I recall. And I may have shared it with a professor later. When I'm asked questions like this also often bubbles up and I share the story, but I didn't really address it, I don't think, like officially with the institution. I mean, I don't think they didn't know him. They're just like talking to some point person within the denominations and like, hey, can you bring your folks? Okay, and that was it for them. But no, I don't think I made some official report of it at the time.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody have something? I'm so shocked that you experienced it so much later in life, right? So another testament to how you talked about just the nurturing environments that you were brought up in and the very empowering environments that you were brought up in. So I would say for me, it was looking around at who was doing the work and who was being I was like, women run the church. I was just like, they would always be like, oh, go ask this person, go ask it. And I'm like, it's always a woman that had the answer. And then I would see men say, no, we're not going to do that. And I'm like, you didn't do anything. Like, so I remember picking that up really early, and particularly at my grandmother's church in the Deep South, where I watched my grandmother not only clean the church, she opened the church and she closed the church. And then she was also on the phone and make sure this happens and make sure that happens. And then sister so-and-so was doing this part and sister so, and it was like, I would see this like year after year after year. And I remember asking my grandfather, who never went to church, by the way, they were an interfaith couple, much like myself. And he was like, he would get frustrated that my grandmother worked as hard as she did. And he would express that to her, that he didn't like how she worked so hard, but that the preacher got all the credit. And then there was another layer because they were also relatives. So these were like layers of cousins, right? Which is not unusual in the South, where you go to like a family church. But I just remember that. And then I remember hearing my grandmother pray at home or with us. And then I'd be like, Big Mama, why don't you ever pray at church? Because her prayers were just so powerful and beautiful. And even if I didn't know what they meant, I was just like, because I was little, but asking those questions like, why don't you ever get up there and speak? And then the church that I grew up in, it, again, being a spicy, spunky Black girl and celebrating that, like highly literate, and we had something in the Methodist and Presbyterian church called Call to Worship. And I was like, oh my gosh, can I do that? And I could barely see over the pulpit. And so I didn't even know that you, as a woman in some Christian traditions, that you couldn't be in the pulpit. Because I grew up in a church where we spoke from the pulpit, and it was very, very different. So I remember like going up in the pulpit, and my grandmother, she was like, what are you doing? And she was just in there cleaning, like she was vacuuming. And so I went up there with her, to sit down and like just kind of kick my legs around, And so then I was just like, I started to like see these things, and I was like, I don't like this. And I started to question that with the adults that I trusted, which was mostly my mother, who, for those of you who know my mom, know she's just a straight shooter. So she just kind of sticks to the facts of it. There's no feeling behind it. But I just remember that going, I have a problem with that. And it was so agitated, it just did this. And I could never stop talking about it. And I never felt like it was adequately addressed. And so I was like, yeah, I'm out of here. Like, I'm out of here. So it was that kind of thing. And I realized that this is religion. This is not God. This is like how we're practicing God. I didn't have those exact words. I probably said something like, this is whack, but understanding like that was the moments for me, was just in the subtlety, the little things like, why, you go sit there, or we're pouring the water for the men. I'm like, y'all in the kitchen sweating. What I need water for? That idea kind of came up for me. And so that is where things started to really like make me question.
It's an interesting thing because there's no one thing that immediately comes to mind for me, which is problematic, honestly. So born and raised, grew up Catholic church, and you were either the nun, the sister, or the priest. Those were your options. So, as a girl, I kind of had that option. And I always thought celibacy, because there's 3 vows you take: poverty, celibacy, and obedience. And I always thought celibacy was the hard one because I wanted to be a mom, so there was no path for me to be a leader spiritually and also be a mother, and that was just so hard to imagine. And also I grew up in a very insular Catholic community. Everybody else was Catholic. And so it wasn't until I busted out in college, my friends were Jewish, or they were atheist, or, Muslim, so many different traditions. And then I started to realize, honestly, it was more then. And as I got older, which I find just fascinating, because I just assumed so much of it. And I did one memory I have, and this was when I was in school in New York, and I was trying, to go to mass. It was at the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Holy Day. I'm across at this church, going to mass, and there's this priest bellowing the sermon, and Catholic priests aren't known for being great preachers. But he was talking about, Eve and Mary, and he was putting them as a duality. And he said, and I've written about this, that's why it's always so close up here. But he said, whereas Mary was obedient, Eve was disobedient. And for me, the story of Adam and Eve is all about Eve wanting more, or Eve's desire for consciousness, or to know and to experience for herself and not be told what her experience was to be. And so I did something that the good little Catholic girl, Jennifer Ann, never would have done. I stood up in the middle of the sermon. I had to walk past and get past like 12 people, and I walked straight down the aisle out of the church. And I'm like, get me the hell out of here. Because it felt dangerous. That was when I started to feel like that sense of, this is dangerous when these traditions are being weaponized against women.
I always wondered, what these words, who came up with calling it the pit?
The devil?
The pit, the pulpit.
Oh, pulpit. Oh, the pulpit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's just my brain.
Yeah.
Dismantling something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, the pulpit, and so you pulled out, I call it the pit.
Yeah.
In my resistance to all that I've experienced, and that it was more like a pit. And the story of Jesus Christ around Christianity, and the only time that I recall that he lost his cool was in the sanctuary. That's the only time I read about he really tore things up and broke it up, tore it up. And so that has been my thought. And I've always just been wondering, going to seminary with all these people that go to the seminary, what's it for? What is the purpose? What are they to get from that? And so this is interesting, listening to everyone's story and their experience going to the seminary, and the silence of the voice of woman, and really where I stand now, and I'm just so happy to see women rising, unsilencing their voice. And my rationale is, who understands conflict resolution better than a mother raising children in resolving conflict and having hard conversations. In many of the marriages or relationships, it's always the woman. She always want to talk. She just want to have a conversation. We struggle with that.
Mhm.
And I'm saying, have the conversation. So women, yes, you. Yes, the rising of women. Yes, the unsilencing of the voice of women and mothers in resolving conflict. I mean, when I think of the many leaders, the many wars that we have experienced, I mean, with the male leaders, I mean, it's guns and bombs. Guns, war. That's the mind of the leaders of the male, that you got to be aggressive some kind of way, that you can't have the hard conversation, and in that you can find common ground if you stay with it and don't leave the table, and you can hear, you can understand the perspective of the other person is listening. And you might not agree on everything, every single thing, but you can find common ground around whatever issue or problem that you're having in your household, in the world. So I'm praying for them. I do pray. And there's more than one way to talk to God, I say. And we got to get in this form. I put, that's the thing that I do every single morning. And I put my mind there and go to the presence of the Creator, the Spirit of God, of being thankful for waking up and give us this day. I worked that Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread of peace, of patience, of long suffering. I work it, and I work that forgiveness piece a lot. Not only for myself, but for those that have forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And I stop right there when I need to call some names, and I say the words to let it go, and suffer us not to be led into temptation, to hate, to judge, to fear, or anything that is not of love. Because quite honestly, frankly, for me, and that's my big question to anybody, human, male or female, how does one do hate? How do you do that? I hate shrimp, and I hate okra. I don't hate people. I don't hate white people. I hate racism. That's what I hate. And the only law under which I abide is love. And when I recognize that I'm in the presence of that energy, of that hate, of that negative energy, of anyone, whether they're black, white, or whatever, I remove myself. Have the courage and good sense to walk away from a fool. or foolishness. Don't engage with it. Whatever is negative energy that is not of love, remove yourself away from it and don't engage with it. Go down over in there. So that's what I have to say.
In my time, there were two Catholic churches, St. Anthony and St. Rose, and my family went to St. Anthony, and the Mexican families in our town went to St. Rose. And this was in the 70s. That's how it was. Not enforced, but just by, I guess, tradition or whatever. So your question was, how did I put it for my earliest? So from the very beginning, right? We have a priest, who's a guy. We didn't have nuns in our we school that had closed. My brother, who was younger, but was, eligible to be, a cool candle lighter altar person, and I was not, although he didn't choose to do it. Right? So freaking annoying, right? And our priest, who my grandpa, in his retirement, golfed with, I think, on Thursdays, right? Everybody thought he was an ass, but we're stuck with him, right? And during, so in Catholic tradition, we go to, we called it CCD, catechism class. So it was like Sunday school, but not on Sunday. We went on Saturdays. I believe it was on Saturdays. And I started asking questions, and I was just basically told, because that's the way it is, and don't ask any more questions. Right? Just didn't work well with my brain. And I'm super grateful that I was born into a family where Dad will ask any question I have. Answer. If you don't know, answer it. And so I started asking questions about Catholicism and why is it this way and why do we that? And why does Grandma wear a doily on her head? And this is pre-whatever Vatican. These things. Pay attention, why do we eat fish on Fridays? Well, because economically, that came out of getting fishermen more money back in the day, and it became church law. Like there were these things that were related to economics and politics that became church rules that then we had to follow. And both of my grandmothers, my mom's mom and my dad's mom, were converts into Catholicism, and were more devout than the Catholics that I experienced as that had grown up in the faith tradition. And they didn't ask any questions. You just did, and that never made sense to me. And why do we have to listen to a man that everybody thinks is silly? And why are we stuck with him?
Please ask questions.
Yes, please ask questions.
Why.
And if you're not allowed to ask a question, then leave.
I think that is probably one of the most powerful statements that can be told to a woman, is to ask questions and to flee from, I would rather someone say, well, because we want to keep you oppressed. Like, I'd be like, okay, I can deal with that. But the lies, right? And I feel like sometimes adults had never asked those questions. So a lot of them felt stumped because they were like, whoa, I don't even know what to do with this. And I had a Sunday school teacher named Gus McCullen, and his daughter was my age. And he was like a biblical scholar. And so I lied to get into confirmation. So because all my cousins were older than me, and I was tall, and I was like, I'm 13, but I was 10. So I got to finish confirmation when I was 10 instead of 13. And I was like wanting to know. I was always reading, and at the end you get a Bible. And I remember Gus wrote in the Bible, just promise me you will continue to wear this thing out. And I thought, like, that was just the most powerful thing that he could say to me, because of course now as an adult I can look back and he was like engaging me, but he wasn't sure how far he could go, right? Mm-hmm. Like he wasn't sure how much he could answer. So before I ask this next question, I want to share a quick little story about this. This was given to me in a restaurant. We had 2 visitors come to the Women's Center, and they wanted to possibly have me come and speak to them and to share some poetry. They have a group of women of different walks of life, and all of these women are in their late 70s and early 80s. And what they did to start the group, they were knitting and doing some art, but instead of talking about themselves, the question that they would ask is, tell me about your grandmother. Mm-hmm. And so that was how they got these women from these different walks of life to start sharing. And what they discovered in the groups was that some of their grandparents had been very oppressive to each other's grandparents. And they were like, that's the church that we weren't actually allowed to come to. When our family came to the town, they closed the door in our face to the church. So it just kind of created all of this. Well, anyway, I ended up seeing them a few weeks later, and they said, I don't know who you are, but I knew who they were. And they were like, well, we feel really drawn to give you this. And this song was sang in the church. And so I kept it, and I brought it here. And this is what one of the work study students did, not these 2 here. When they tried to laminate it, because I was like, I have to keep this, but I want to read it. There's a line, this is called There's a Line of Women. And they sang this song. They had a guest minister, and I was just having like mimosas, and they came up and was like, I just feel inclined to give this to you, which I always have these very sacred experiences like this, right? There is a line of women extending back to Eve, whose role in shaping history God only could conceive. And through endless ages, their witness was repressed. God valued and inspired them, though whom the world was blessed. Through whom the world was blessed. There is a line of women who took on powerful men, defying laws and scruples to let life live again. Sorry, it's all the spaces and words. And though, despite their triumph, their stories stayed untold, God kept their number growing, creative, strong, and bold. There is a line of women who stood by Jesus' side, who housed him when he ministered, who held him when he died. And though they claimed he'd risen, their news was deemed suspect till Jesus stood among them, his womanly elect. So sing a song of Anna, who saw Christ's infant face, and sing a song of Martha, who gave him food and space, and sing a song of all the Marys who heeded his requests, and now at heaven's banquet are Jesus's fondest guests. I don't know who wrote this song, but I thought, what would happen in a church if this was like the go-to song? You know how people have their daily song, not just Women's History Month, right? But if this was like deeply incorporated, it made me think of Rev Ari's book, Women in the Bible and You. Do you have it there? Can you hold it up? Do you have it?
Of course, one of my crumb snatching, loving students that I love so much has borrowed my copy that's normally sitting in the office. I can see
we added it to our library here, or it's being added, but we have it here in our over 1,000 book of women writers. It's over 1,000 books here. Can you believe that? All women writers. And so we've added your book to that for our spirituality section. Absolutely. Awesome. And are excited about that. So I'm leading with that song to ask each of you, who is one of your sheroes? And it can be within your faith or outside of your faith, but for you all, who are your sheroes?
Can I respond?
Yes.
I was kind of taking notes because I'm hearing this theme. It might be the writer in me, but Eve has come up like several times since we've been talking today, and she would really be my shero. I remember when I was a freshman in college or something, I had this idea, I'm going to create this program. I stayed writing a program, okay? I put it in my little journal that I got from Barnes & Noble on the plaza. when I was in high school. And it says "You Go Girl" on the outside. But I wrote out this. It's actually still here on my shelf. Program called Eve's Daughters. And I always found, I don't know, I just like Eve. I always had in me this one desire to like fight for her or to redeem her story. And that's actually the very first devotion in that book that Natasha brought up that I wrote, Women of the Bible and You. Because I love this idea of her wanting more, of her being inquisitive. Also, like, it was just a bad case. She needed a better lawyer. She wasn't even there when God and Adam made the deal. Like, there's so many things overlooked in the way the story is presented in the text. But Mother Mary, you had asked or raised the question about what are people doing in seminary, right? What is their experience? And for me, that was actually the place that awakened in a very deep way my feminism and womanism, that exposed me to women scholars who I could look at and talk to right there in the place, but also ones that I read, right? The Dolores Williams, and her Sisters in the Wilderness book changed my life, and taught me to engage the biblical text critically, and to not just that it didn't just fall out the sky, right? That there was more, to teach me to do an exegetical process whereby I could better understand the historical context, better understand the cultural context, all those pieces, and then be able to take steps to get to the contemporary context, right? Which is why I'm able and have been blessed to be able to do things like write a book like that. I wrote that whole book very clear that the objective was to redeem the stories of these women, because their stories are told in the text in service of a larger narrative, that of Israel's. They don't stand on their own. So what does it look like to try to peek underneath and behind it and see what gems are there, so that we can, as women say, be empowered by their stories? And some of them not the most popular ones. But I love Eve because in so many ways, I mean, she kind of sits up as this like mother figure. She was the first to ever do this, in terms of how she's presented in the narrative, right? And one of my favorite things about her is that we often focus on what happens with her and Adam in the garden and the fall, so to speak. But I love Genesis 4:1. I ain't come here to preach, and I'm not preaching, okay? But I would say she has this line about where she has her child, and she's like, with the help of God, I've done this thing. She's like so amazed that she was able to bring forth life with God. And what was beautiful about that to me, and what stands out to me for her, is there was more to her story beyond her quote unquote mistake. And the same is true for any of us, right? So when I think about faith and feminism, I am finding or excited about moments like that in the text, where there's so much to unpack, so much to empower us, that often gets overlooked, right? We just see her as the one we blame, stuff like periods, just stuff we've just made up that literally have nothing to do with what's actually in the story anyway. But we blame her for a lot, but I've seen so much power in her. I love Eve. It's interesting to me that she has come up so many different times in our conversation today.
I want to make a comment to it's Tynetta Muhammad. I hope I'm saying that right, or Tynetta Muhammad. Okay, he said that's deep, as if it's talking about your comment. I think, Jen, as if it is taboo for a woman to want to be intelligent and to learn more. It also says that always baffled me when it clearly says you should ask and you shall receive. So thank you for having your students join us too as well. Would anyone else like to share about their hero?
Never good at these questions where you have to choose one thing.
Well, just choose A. Like, it doesn't have to be that only. Just one of them. First of all, how can you like only have one hero? Yeah. So just maybe pick one for today.
Maya Angelou was good.
My paternal grandmother is really one of mine. And, you know, she grew up farm in Arkansas, one of 14 kids, and couldn't go beyond 6th grade. And she was probably one of the brightest kids in the family because the high school was too far away. And she worked in the Simmons factory here. She worked as a maid. And I love how she used where she was to do things that were powerful. I believed as the recipient of her stories, and how important her faith was to her, even though she didn't really know what to do with mine because mine seemed way out there. But I'll never forget when I graduated from seminary, she gave me the rosary that my grandfather had given her on their 15th anniversary. And so it was this beautiful way of her acknowledging me and my journey, even though it was really different, but still tying and keeping it to that connection. And she just continued to open up to life as she aged. And I just think that was the most beautiful thing. So I think about my grandma all the time.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Oh, it's leaking out of my eyes.
I already know.
I know. Oh, frick. Okay, there it goes. Grandma's making it leak out of my eyes.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't. I'm thinking of like all the authors and all of them, Maya Angelou and everything. I think I'm going to choose my grandma Vera right now. As the one that comes to the top. She was quietly, not quietly, get it done, and maybe where I learned that, Natasha, like, get it done in spite of whatever everybody else is, you know, you say I can't, but I'm going to go this way around and get it done. And all of our to the little table right off the kitchen, she called the breakfast room. It sounded very fancy, but the table we sat at a lot. And more in like when I would come home from college, but even a little bit in high school when I could slow down, go and just have those conversations with her about whatever she said. You could listen to her, and then just little tidbits that would come out that when I string them together, I'm like, oh, you were giving me those little pearls, right? There's a song about string pearls too, but and that she also did things like the first person who I learned the word yoga from was my grandma. And the first person I learned about reflexology was my grandma. And the first person who gave me something about apple cider vinegar was my grandma. This is Wellington, Kansas, on the Oklahoma border, where there's not a holistic anything. And I don't know where she was coming across this stuff. There's no internet. There's no, maybe Prevention Magazine. That's pretty mainstream now, but was like, and I'm like, it's just so interesting that like those little things that have become such a part of how I do things. My grandma was doing that, and I would guess like nobody was gonna do, right? Like, but she'd be like that hurts. Well, you could go see Skaggs. Skaggs was Mr. Skaggs, I guess. Was the person who did reflexology, is the practice of there's points on the bottom of your feet that relate to other places in your body, and you can touch them, and so you get a headache, you do this one place on your foot. And so she would go see Skaggs, and she's like, I hate it because it hurts, but then I feel better, and I don't tell Dr. Cole because I think I'm ready. But she saw Skaggs more than she. It was just super interesting. That
I never know that about your grandma.
I know, it's just like
that makes a lot of
I
sense.
forget that she made it okay.
Yeah.
And my other grandma was just fiercely independent in a I can't really be fiercely independent kind of way. Coming off the farm, very poor St. Joe, coming through the Depression. And she again, my dad, who wasn't very kind of as nice, would say, she wears the pants in the family, which wasn't a compliment then, right? It wasn't a compliment for the woman to wear the pants in the family when she was bossing her husband around. And now I'm looking at like, they probably had a very cool relationship. And she just did those things, and he, he called her a little woman, and she got it done. But they didn't cross Eileen because she's gonna let you have it. So
I see them both in you.
uh-huh.
Yeah. So I often refer to Jess as Thelma and Louise. I send her in for the nice stuff, and then I come in with the with the with the power. And then if we have to go in for power first, then I go in, and then she slides behind the door and like locks everybody in. So yeah, we figured that out really quickly. We had a business together, and we knew which personality needed to go first, and and all of those things. So it makes me think about that. And I was thinking about grandmother energy. Now, I do not have a grandchild on the way, but my children are reproductive age. Okay. And I know that's kind of hard to think about, but it's true, right? My son will be 25 and my daughter is 20, and my nephew, who I help raise, is 31. But I've been dreaming of this baby. And so I was telling my husband, I was like, I have been dreaming of babies. And so we look a lot at dogs. And we talk about dogs as like our grandkids. And I said, that is the infiltration of white culture. Because what are Black folks doing? I even knitted a blanket for my nephew's dog, in which I told Jen, I have been deeply impacted by white women by doing this for a pet. It's an ongoing joke, you all. Please don't get offended. Because Jess and Jen are both big animal lovers. And I am not. But I am like, I've evolved, right? So that's another thing. So what I want to say about the grandmother part is that it is really tied to me, the feminism and the faith part, even in my own existence, because my grandmother had a business in a church, and I have a business in a church. My other grandmother was an employee in the church, and I'm an employee in the church. And I would have never, and I looked up one day and I said to my mother, I was like, I have a business in the church and I work for it. I was like, this is insane. And my mother also is the financial secretary. So I just call her the savior of the church. Because if you know anything about the business of church, the business of church is not a place where you get spiritually fed. It is a business. It's just like anything else, right? And you have to make tough decisions, and but it's in this place that is supposed to be sacred. And so to me, that is why women are often successful in those spaces, because we're like, okay, everyone has to get fed, but now let's look at how are we going to feed all these things, and then how are we going to negotiate all this other space? And that's why I think I'm very big on like, no, I actually did that. And it's so subtle because you can get really erased in all of that, in all of the work. So even within our very progressive spiritual community, when you look on stage on Sunday, it's all men. And then when women do speak, it's almost like, let's just throw them up there, because there are women who even say, oh, I don't like to hear women preach. I've heard that so many times. And I'm like, have you even heard enough women to? But again, this is the standard, right? So if it's
Our ear is trained.
So if we don't feel this masculine presence and energy coming from a spiritual teaching, which is often anti-woman, then it's like, I don't like that. It's like it kind of trips up a little bit of that. And so as I was thinking about grandmothers and the passing on of tradition and faith, that is a big part, of if you get something. And I think that's also what made it difficult for me to break from it. Like, I wasn't worried about my mom. I was worried about my grandmothers, who I was both very close to. And I wasn't honest that I broke until I was grown. So I was 14 when I broke away, but then my one grandmother is an artist. So she got it, and she was just like, look, find your path to God and be a good person. That was that grandmother. My other grandmother was like, okay, so you're going to marry a Muslim. All right. Okay. So what does that mean? And then she was just like, okay, do they know who Jesus is? So it was like all these like real questions. So then when we came to visit her, she was like, I have made a vegetarian meal for you. It was so sweet. And it was nothing but the most overcooked, horrible, mushy vegetables ever, which she always cooked amazing vegetables. But she was like, I got to do this right to show like I am trying to grow and accept this, right? And so I think about that idea of like faith in around women, because it's like, it's this weird thing about this masculine leadership of the church, but the spiritual part, it appears to me to really come down through the woman, not through the actual masculine or through the religion. So I wanted to ask everyone in the room that like their take on that. And I just want to say too, Tanetta says, I would say all of my sheroes are warriors. One would be Winnie Mandela. My mother grew up on the west side of Chicago. I was just there in the 60s and made it through some adversity that would break me. Absolutely. Another one is my grandmother, who was raised in Forest City, Arkansas. She used to show me the cotton fields where she picked cotton 6 months out the year and migrated to Chicago for more freedom. I'm so glad you have those lessons and that you were told that, because I really had to uncover that a lot. And so that is so awesome. Yes. And Winnie Mandela for me as well as Gwendolyn Brooks, also from the west side of Chicago. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Yes, we have so much value that we don't know we have, for sure. For sure. So for you all, and just in this discussion that you've heard or been a part of or listened to, what is your take on anything, or if you have any questions for our panel, if you'd like to do that at this time, or comments?
Yeah, so I've been wrestling. I grew up in a very structured, conservative Christian church, and then noticed over time it kept shifting to more and more oppressive for women. And I like saw the transition, and it came along with, them showing like abortion videos and things like this, and it started to be hateful. So, so now as an adult, I am fairly involved with church, and but it is a church where I question, and I can question everything, and nothing is seen as hypocritical or hypocrisy. But I'm thinking about the Bible as a story narrative, but also it has been filtered through men, and we can't have a story like enter our being without changing it through our own lived experience. And I realize that some people believe that the Bible is literally like penned by God through people, but yet it is a story, and a story's been left out, a lot of stories. And a lot of the overlay on Bible stories, like that we call Rahab the prostitute, it does not say she is a prostitute anywhere in that story. She is a businesswoman who was supporting her family and might have been a sex worker, which was totally acceptable. I just don't get it, but we filtered it through this like false notion of like kind of Victorian purity or
religious culture.
Right. So then I'm throwing away some of those things that I always thought were true, and I'm just re-looking at everything. And trying to like go back to original language. So I was wondering, like, in your faith traditions, like, how does your faith text either support and validate or undermine your faith?
Yeah,
How does our faith text
support or undermine us. Or faith.
Feminism.
Yeah.
Like if
our
you
personal
if
faith? Like
if the Bible is your faith text, is it like, do you look at it and feel like a sinking feeling, like I need to read that, or are you built up by your faith text?
I came from,
You go ahead.
well, I was going to say, I came from Roman Catholic background, so the Bible wasn't that important, quote unquote, as opposed to some of the Protestant denominations where it's all about the word. I always joke that the first time I went to a Methodist service, I got a headache because there were so many words, and because I was used to the silence and the music and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, but for me, what happened is I found corners within those places. So the Catholic text includes books that aren't in the Protestant Bible, which includes some of my favorite wisdom traditions, which is where the feminine is more present. And so that's kind of where I found my way. But I'm not somebody who goes to the Bible and that feeds me spiritually. It's much more of an intellectual probably thing now than it was maybe before. But I come from different traditions. So yeah, Reverend Ari.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think it's all about your lens.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the other pieces I would say I gained from seminary is being able to identify my own lens and sometimes being able to note other people's lenses too. So I think the biblical text could go either way, right? I mean, it's the same way the Bible was used to justify slavery and also used to say we need to get free and God says so, right? So for me, certainly my perspective is to always look for the empowerment, to always look for the liberation piece. Like that's critical for me. I can give you a quick story. I hope it's a quick story, an example. One time I was invited to preach which was a big deal, at a Baptist church for a Women's Day event, which was big. I don't know if they'd ever had a woman preacher. They may have had women speakers. And this certainly wasn't a church that was not open to women speaking, obviously, because they had invited me. But I just remember there being some talk about this was kind of a big deal for this particular pastor. But okay, cool. Y'all want me to pick there? I knew some people there. They recommended me, so I came. Well, the text that they provided, sometimes when you have these special days, they give you a text or a theme. And the text they provided was 1 Peter 3:3, which says, "Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold or jewelry and fine clothes." There's more to it. But I'm like, now wait.
What?
I'm like, okay, now y'all want me to preach on Women's Day. And this is your text. I was like, and when I tell you, I wrestled with it because I'm like, what do I do with this? Because I have to be authentically me in the pulpit, which for me, that means speaking a word of empowerment always to people, period. But certainly on Women's Day, that's who I am. I can't say something different than that. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? Well, my seminary training kicked in and I was up all night, literally never went to sleep the night before. And I dug under that text, doing the exegetical work, looking at the commentaries and the scholars and who has said and done all these things to help us understand the text, and actually found empowerment in that text. It's just buried. That it's not on the surface. But what I found was really the writer is saying to these Christian women who were married to men who believed differently that they had power to influence their husbands and their families. It doesn't sound like it on the surface, but when you dig under it, you see that there's all this there. The writer is essentially saying, like, you have the power to be influential to the men around you and to help shape and craft their faith because of who you are, right? And so I didn't take that text and say to the women, y'all stop getting your hair done. Absolutely not. It wasn't about that, right? It was about, and so for a writer in the first century to be saying to women, you have this power to be influential in the world around you, in a world in which they were not considered citizens. They didn't have any rights. Their whole identity was tied to men. Very, very powerful message. So, but I have to decide that that's what I'm looking for because to Natasha's point earlier, there's the church, there's the tradition, and then there's God. They ain't all the same. Sometimes they align real good. Sometimes not so much, right? This work we do in church and faith communities is human. Like it's so, and so we ain't so good sometimes at how we approach these things. So you'll see the sexisms, the racisms, all the isms, the classisms pop up because we kind of suck. Doing things like that or expressing God's love as we should all the time. So I would say for me, my text itself, it's about how I approach the text, and it's about the values that I take to it, and the questions, my not being willing. Like because it was either like come find the empowerment moment in that text or that passage, or preach something totally different. Because no way could I stand in that pulpit and tell women what it looked like it was saying on the surface. So it's about what I bring to it. And the challenge is that unfortunately there's such a gap often between what we're taught to do in certain, in seminary, for example, and what we then come and empower lay folks to be able to do for themselves. Right. So conversations like this are critical. We need to have more of them, particularly in our faith communities as well. I hope that answered your question. Kind of long.
Ooh, I think that was a wonderful, powerful way to end this discussion. I can't believe it is 4:58. Ariane, Jen says she's sending a flight so that you can come and move back to Kansas City. That she refuses to let you live in Indiana. Like, no, she had like 13 going away parties, first of all. Be clear. I think I attended.
How long ago was this that you left us?
Oh, hilarious. It was 7 years ago. Yeah, 7 years.
All right, it's time to come home.
My husband would support this. He actually fell in love with Kansas City. He's from Indiana. But he was like, let's go tomorrow.
All right.
Yes. You just went there to get him. So I do want to remind you that was why you went. It was a divine thing.
Time to come
back. Come on back, girl. Come on back. But thank you so much. I know we have a time difference, and so I just appreciate you being on. And do you want to share any celebratory news with the women?
How many people are watching this? Who's on the street?
Well, it's gonna be up. So okay.
Okay, no,
so
not yet.
All right.
But y'all go ahead and fill in the blanks.
Kansas City. Just kidding. No,
I got so excited. That was so mean.
Nothing else.
Did you see my heart? I'm so excited.
But you know what? I'm just gonna put it out there because it was a wonderful day for you, but definitely a sad day for me because we always have wonderful interfaith conversations, and obviously she's always funny and hilarious, and so I just want to say thank you. Let's give all of our guests a round of applause. Thank you, Jess, Mother Mary, and Jen. Thank you all for coming and saying thank you, Chelsea, so much for being the person that always, and I always have to say this because Chelsea is one of those people who is, I'm like, did you just create that, Chelsea? Like, that's amazing. And she's like, oh, that's not that much. I'm like, no, that's absolutely great. But she is just so wonderful to work with, as well as our work study staff here and all the students that come through. Thank you so much for sharing your comments. I know we're at the end of our time, but you all please, just a couple of quick announcements. If you're on RU groups, you can follow UMKC Women's Center. Also, we're on Facebook and Instagram. So this will be up live. Please share it, the conversation within your communities, and ask people to follow, like, and share UMKC Women's Center. We want everyone to know that we are open from 9 to 3, Monday through 9 to 4, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3 on Friday during regular university days and hours and times. We are at 5120 Rock Hill Road, which is actually on the corner of 52nd and Rock Hill in Hague Hall, first floor. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you all for being so honest and having such an engaging conversation. Reverend Ari has Women in the Bible and You. Mother Mary has Back to the Table. And so we have two authors here. Do you have any books out yet? And do you have any out yet? And so best of luck for you, future Reverend Jess. I'm going to giggle every time I say that. And so in the same, well, we always giggle. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And you all have a wonderful, safe time towards the end of the semester. Do want to tell students that we do have an interfaith council if you're interested in joining a faith community that's a part of it. And that here at the Women's Center, we always, through a feminist, womanist lens, try to engage in thoughtful conversation for the full development of our students. So we're here for women and all who love and support women. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say something earlier when we were asking the audience. I was going to say that you mentioned that somebody wouldn't talk much about going to the reflexology doctor because they didn't want to appear nutty. And I think that's also a very feminist issue because like nuttiness is like is seen as very gendered.
Yes.
And also in my experience, my experience with the gender gap in faith is like when I was a kid, me and my grandma, whenever I would go over to her house, you know, she was a very religious person, and I had grown up like watching Bill Nye and whatever documentaries, and I would always bring to the situation like I would take the position and play the role of the person who's super rational and telling her you're nutty, which, you know, I always had a great time, but that was whenever the topic got to that was always what happened. So
yeah, that's really powerful, and that how women process, right? And in our sacred traditions have been called witches, right? Women that gather, women with candles, women in caves. So anything around sensuality, pleasure, and healing, always seen as the antithesis to faith and to nutty. And that still carries over.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it really does carry over. If you say, oh, I'm going to a women's circle, it's always like, and it's always kind of weaponized, it's sexualized, and it's all kind of coming from this patriarchal glance a lot of ways. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, that is really powerful to acknowledge. And
Historically, a man could commit his sister, wife to
Yes.
a mental institution for almost no reason at all.
yeah. Yeah, and like honor murders, where if a woman makes a decision that she doesn't want to marry someone, the men in the family can decapitate her and you know, carry her head through the streets. So that is happening today. And it's not and that is in the name of religion and dishonoring the family and the decision around marriage. So yes, so all of those, that's great. Well, we are going to end this broadcast, and thank you all so much. Thank you.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Can't wait for you to move home. I'm not giving up.
Thank you, Tynetta Muhammad, for joining us.